Microphone.
I'll get you a chair if you can just wait real quick.
Okay, let's go ahead and call to order this Tuesday, June 4th meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. You take the roll.
Ms. Fuller?
Here.
Mr. Willis is absent. Ms. Brown?
Here.
Ms. Marshall? Here. Ms. Austin?
Here.
Mr. Freemeyer?
Here.
Mr. Patinos?
Here.
Mr. Kenton?
Here.
And Chair Townley.
Here. Okay, next we'll move on to the approval of the May 21st minutes. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
In a second?
Second.
Any discussion or edits? No? Okay.
Ms. Fuller?
Yes.
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Marshall?
Abstain.
Ms. Austin?
Yes.
Mr. Patinos?
Yes.
Mr. Freemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Kenton?
Yes.
And Chair Townley.
Yes. Okay, next we have public forum. This is an opportunity for anyone in the audience who wishes to address the commission on issues other than what would be in the next two public hearings. If so, we ask you to come forward to the podium. And anyone here for public forum? Do not see anyone? Okay. So we will move forward to item number 5, public hearing case 2017-3, short-term rental regulations, with Eric Sampson. Yeah. Do we have a motion to open the public hearing?
I move that the public hearing be opened.
Ms. Fuller?
I'm sorry.
It's a vote on opening the public, motion to open the public hearing. You're fine.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Marshall?
Yes.
Ms. Austin?
Yes.
Mr. Patinos?
Yes.
Mr. Freemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Kenton?
Yes.
And Chair Townley.
Yes. Okay, now we'll hear from staff.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that you will tell the truth in this proceeding before the Planning and Zoning Commission?
I do.
Please state your name.
Eric Sampson. All right, so short-term rentals. So just to give you a brief background on this. We might as well start off with the basics. What is a short-term rental? So a short-term rental is a dwelling unit or portion thereof, say a room, basement, etc., that's rented to guests on a nightly, weekly, or for a duration of less than 30 consecutive days. Short-term rentals are limited to single-family dwellings, duplexes, townhomes, condos, and sometimes, depending on the community, accessory dwelling units. They don't include, say, motels, hotels, other establishments that were designed for, say, short periods of stay overnight, things like that. It also does not include RVs or bed and breakfasts. Oftentimes, many communities have a stipulation in which the primary residence, the short-term rental must be an accessory use to a primary residence, meaning that the person cannot own a house and live in Hawaii and then rent out their property in Englewood as a short-term rental. So that is oftentimes prohibited. The planning and zoning, staff originally brought short-term rental discussion to you back in 2017. And over the past couple of years, we've been kind of going back and forth and kind of looking at the regulations and staff's been doing STR research. And so I think we finally come to a place where planning and zoning is comfortable with moving forward with the recommendation on these short-term rental regulations. Before I go on to that, just a little background on short-term rentals. In Englewood, they have been increasing in popularity, and not just in Englewood, along the entire Front Range, as the Front Range has seen more population boom over the last few years, also in tourism. So these are becoming fairly commonplace. And as of right now, I think it's worth noting is that Englewood right now doesn't have anything in their zoning code which would regulate the short-term regulation use. And due to the popularity of sites such as Airbnb, HomeAway, Turnkey, et cetera, there's a plethora of kind of home sharing, home rental websites out there now. And if you go on any one of them, you would see a number of those properties are listed in Englewood. So they're there, they're taking place, and so what would be some of the benefits for allowing short-term rentals in Englewood? So right now, they're currently not allowed by zoning. So it does increase lodging options for visitors and tourists. It addresses the need for accommodations in an area where quality lodging options do not exist. Englewood does not have, say, a hotel. It provides housing options for short-term stays. And this is something that we've kind of come across in our research. And then recently we noticed that patients that need to come to Swedish for, say, a week or two stay for treatment and things like that are looking for a place to stay that fits that type of accommodation. Same with traveling nurses. We get that a lot where nurses will come in for a matter of 3 weeks to a month, and then they're off to a different hospital. So we can definitely see an impact in short-term rentals by the presence of Swedish and Craig in the city. And just being able to have some sort of accommodation for those types of instances. So STRs also provide rental income for the owner and also provides lodging and sales tax to the city. So some of the concerns that we've had regarding short-term rentals, we did have an open house regarding short-term rentals back in October. We also had a short-term rental forum where we had individuals from different cities who had implemented short-term rentals come and speak to those interested here. So some of those, out of those couple hearings we heard, were the concerns regarding party houses, where there's a lot of people staying in a small space, there's high occupancy, there is a lot of noise and other nuisances, including impacts to on-street parking and so on. And again, so the short-term rental uses is currently unregulated by city zoning code. And that being said, some of the benefits of having short-term rental regulations can include They would require each short-term rental to have a permit, which is issued by the city. In this case, it would be the Community Development Department. And these would be valid for 12 months, and they would be subject to annual renewal. And they would also help establish uniform operating standards for each STR, so everyone is playing with the same rule book, if you will. It would also allow us to make STRs an accessory use to a primary residence, and that would just be to, in effect, better to regulate, say, outside absentee landlords coming in and purchasing up property and using those residences for strictly a rental purpose. This would also allow us to limit occupancy. It would also allow us to establish parking requirements for any STR, and it would also allow and give the city the right to revoke STR permits for nuisance or non-compliant properties. So in the draft regulations, which you have attached to your staff report, I'm just going to go through kind of the highlights of what would be required to obtain a short-term rental permit and kind of what our standards are that we have written to the draft in terms of short-term rental operating procedures. So first off, obviously are required to submit an application and a processing fee, which would be determined at a later date. We'd also require them to provide proof of ownership, and they would also be required to sign a notarized acknowledgement of property compliance. And that includes compliance with all city codes and ordinances. It includes a safety checklist. I've actually included a draft of this checklist in your staff report. And also an acknowledgement that the city has the right of inspection at any time at a reasonable time. We would also require a scale floor plan of the short-term rental. That would be to let us know how many bedrooms there are and that could potentially be rented out and what that max occupancy could be. That would also include a scale plan for the property to include parking areas, to determine if they have off-street parking available for short-term rentals or if they would need to be utilizing on-street parking, which is a subject I'll get to in just a second. They'll also be required to have valid tax license. This includes Colorado and Englewood sales tax and Englewood lodging sales tax licenses. So some of the operating standards that are in the draft that you have in front of you, again, we feel pretty strongly that this must be the primary residence of an STR, that they need to live in that property for the majority of time. And they can't be absentee landowners or corporations trying to rent out houses for short-term rental purposes. Also, we establish that STR shall not exceed 2 adults per bedroom, and then we capped it with a maximum of 8 occupants per STR, no matter how many bedrooms you have. We have that it shall not be rented out to more than one party under separate contracts, which is basically saying that you can't rent out to, say, myself and, say, Mr. Dugan at the same time under different contracts. So just keep it balanced, I guess, in a way that prevents kind of the overcrowding issue that has been mentioned. The parking is 1 space per bedroom, and on-street, if they cannot meet those off-street parking requirements, then they are limited to 2 spaces on-street. However, those cannot be reserved for STR use. So those spaces are there. They can let the person who is utilizing the STR know that they're there, but also they need to know that those are not explicitly theirs for the STR use. Also, they need to have a designated contact person to be available 24/7 to respond to any concerns from renters or city enforcement officials, and this person must be able to access the STR in a timely manner in case of complaints and so on and so forth. Some of the other standards that we're proposing is that STRs will be required to have fire extinguishers, carbon monoxide detectors, smoke detectors, et cetera. Every STR must have ingress-egress accessibility, and this is all included in the affidavit waiver that the STR applicant would sign prior to receiving an STR permit. Noise must not extend beyond the property lines of the STR or be in excess of the city's noise regulations. The STR property must be properly maintained and free of uncollected trash, garbage, litter, and must comply with all city property codes. And also, this is pretty common for short-term rentals, is that the STR operator will be required to post information inside the short-term rental, which informs the guests of the city's STR regulations, information for the 24/7 contact person, maximum occupancy, parking locations, exits, so on and so forth. And this is pretty common to see if you have ever utilized a short-term rental, that oftentimes they have it like right on the, on the counter or posted like on a pole on the property when you walk in, just the basic rundown of everything that's expected of the guest. So another aspect of allowing short-term rentals and having short-term rental regulations is it also would allow the city to revoke short-term rental permits after they have been issued. So any STR operating permit, and this is language taken straight from the draft, this may be revoked for cause or suspended by the Director of Community Development after a third sustained violation of any of the following. That includes the short-term rental regulations, or ordinance which is put into place, the Inglewood Municipal Code regulations, city and state sales tax regulations, or the existence of any condition that the city determines constitutes a nuisance or would possibly endanger the health of guests and the health, safety, welfare of any individual. So in regards to the Englewood Comprehensive Plan, a couple of the goals and objectives, Goal 1 and Goal 2, which is the live and work goals of the comprehensive plan. Objective 1.1 is to allow for housing that meets the needs of all income groups, including an appropriate type and location of housing. Similarly, Objective 1.2, it allows for housing investments that improve the housing mix and serve different life cycle stages and groups with special needs in appropriate locations, etc. And Objective 2.2 is create and maintain a workforce housing meeting the needs of both employers and employees. And a lot of these objectives are met with the presence of Swedish and the Swedish need to have people who can come and rent a place for a week, for a few nights, for nurses to come and work for a month, and being able to find adequate accommodations for those needs. So staff finds that that is met in the comprehensive plan. So overall, the staff recommendations, as staff would say, would recommend to allow short-term rentals in residential, multi-use, and medical zone districts. I've got those kind of listed out in this section above, which are all R districts, MU districts, and M districts. And also, staff recommends that the proposed STR regulatory text, which is included in your staff report, be forwarded to City Council with a favorable recommendation for adoption.
Do you have any data from the hospitals as to just how many medical staff there are that are looking for temporary housing?
I don't know the exact number on that.
So this is just anecdotal from
So
somebody
this
told
is
you
from,
that, or
this is basically just taken from phone calls that staff has received regarding rental properties and what they could be used for. And kind of an anecdotal aspect of that is Swedish is, what I've heard is looking to find this kind of short-term housing to be able to
Accommodate.
yeah, that's kind of the word I'm looking for, but yeah, just like accommodate or just be able to find that type of housing for those traveling nurses.
So you don't have any sense of how many that is, like 1 or 2 or 50 or 60 or?
I don't know the exact number. That would be completely ballpark, and I don't feel comfortable saying, but without any further information on that.
Oh, who was first? You want to go, Judy? Okay. Anecdotally, I have rented quite a few Airbnbs and short-term rentals, and actually the biggest source is bookings.com. It's not Airbnb or VRBO. And I would guess, to your question, that might fluctuate up and down depending on the caseload of perhaps professors coming in to teach or something like that, or the load at Craig, which I would think might have a greater need for families to stay close by their patients, but that's just my opinion. So,
It's just that this is the first time I've heard that particular point about the medical staff at Craig needing short-term rentals, and it would be interesting just to contact Swedish and, for me anyway, to actually know if that's a thing or not.
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
For clarification purposes, we are not making recommendations on your drafts for the affidavit or the checklist in this. Is that correct? Are these included? Because I don't want to have to go through the wording on the draft of the checklist and the affidavit. I know it says draft, but I want to know what we're recommending for approval.
So the recommendation, or what you're recommending for approval is strictly the draft STR ordinance.
Okay, so these are not part of.
Correct.
Just wanted to clarify, thank you.
Yep.
I was just going to add that on April 2nd, there was a guy that spoke at the forum, and he was talking all about how he rents out his accessory dwelling unit for a Swedish hospital, and he says it's constantly booked out with nurses or patients. So he said that there aren't any real hotels, like big hotels that are within a reasonable distance of the hospital. So patients just have a hard time at that hospital compared to other ones in Denver area.
Couple questions on the staff report.
Yeah.
Mentioned that it says, at the bottom of page 4, additionally, modifications to the Inglewood Municipal Code will need to occur to address tax licensing regulations set forth in Title IV and lodging licenses in Title V. Can you just explain who will be making those modifications or recommendations for modifications?
Yeah, that would be the city attorney's office.
Okay, thank you. And clarification, I guess, on page 9, or under enforcement, says the city has sent notice of violation letters to those addresses. Is that something that has happened, or that is something that would happen as part of enforcement in the future?
That has happened currently, when staff has received notice with proper evidence that a short-term rental is taking place. We have enforced on that. And since our enforcement's complaint-based, that's
Okay,
what we've done so far.
thank you. And then, other than being able to send those letters, has the city been able to do anything else right now with the Airbnbs or short-term rentals that have been operating?
No.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions for Eric? Okay, thank you. So we will move on to public testimony. This is an opportunity for public to provide testimony regarding this case. All comments should be directed to the commission. The commission has established a 3-minute time limit on speakers. I have a list of folks here that will call forward, and then we'll have you sworn in when you come forward. First, we have Kathleen Bailey.
Do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that you would tell the truth in this matter before the Planning and Zoning Commission?
I do.
Please state your name, and when you're now, you can either state your address, you're a resident of Inglewood, or which district, council district you live in, your choice.
Kathleen Bailey, District 4. I often hear this commission declare their interest and emphasis on protecting property rights, not denying property rights for property owners. Yet your actions do not seem to support your expressed sentiments. Property rights are limited by zoning laws and ordinances, including the STR ordinance, designed to restrict what property owners can do with the real property that they own. The property rights argument should have been used to protect the property rights of all our property owners who select their property purchases based on the existence and protection of these decades-old restrictions that are provided. ADUs, with exceptions of the grandfathered in, multi-unit developments in family-zone neighborhoods, and commercial enterprise of short-term rentals were not property rights in Inglewood. They had not been legal in Inglewood for decades. But instead of protecting the property rights of our existing Inglewood citizens, this commission, under the guidance and direction from the community development and with compliance and approval of our city council, simply changed our zoning laws to allow exceptions for ADUs and multi-unit developments where they had previously been illegal. And these zoning laws changes were made as part of the specific strategy intended to promote the goals set out in the Inglewood 4 Comprehensive Plan that was also engineered by this commission under the guidance and direction of the community development with the compliance and approval of our councils. And now you are also seeking to legalize the commercial enterprise of short-term rentals throughout all of Inglewood neighborhoods. Enforcement of the STR ordinance has always been the responsibility of Inglewood's Department of Community Development, but they did not want to spend the time or money to enforce the existing law, claiming it too vague. But they also did want to spend the time to tighten the ordinance and enforce the law. And if approved, they also don't want to spend the time and money to do safety inspections. But they and this commission want all of us to believe that they will spend the time and money to enforce the laws and protect the neighbors if and when SDRs are made legal. Even though Denver hasn't successfully handled their own problems with STRs, please put our existing citizens first for a change. The commercial enterprise of short-term rentals has no place in our Inglewood residential neighborhoods and must remain illegal in Inglewood. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have C. Ann Dickerson.
Do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that you will tell the truth in this matter before the Planning and Zoning Commission?
I do so swear.
Please state your name at the mic and choose however you wish to designate your location in Inglewood.
Oh, before I start, there are a couple of people that I think want to speak, and they came in late.
The chair will
Okay.
take care of that, but thank you.
Cian Dickerson, I'm in District 1. We don't need any more regulations in Inglewood. Half of our codes aren't being enforced now. Why do we need more regulations? We don't. And who's going to enforce this? Code enforcement isn't enforcing half of the codes they're responsible for. The police aren't doing it either. There was a house in my neighborhood, and there must have been 100 people a month go through there. Some spent the night, some just a couple of hours. And the police said they couldn't do anything about it, and code enforcement wouldn't even try, because she said they were all her relatives. And that somehow absolves them of any regulations. I know that the administration of regulations generally cost more than you could ever obtain from taxes or license fees or anything else. The good guys that are going to be doing this, they don't need the regulations. The bad guys don't care. you're not going to be able to enforce this, and you're going to make a big mess out of the city. I don't want anybody in my residential neighborhood, which is R1A, to have this, because I've lived it. But there are plenty of regulations on the books, if they're just enforced, that would stop it. Tammy Williamson had a party house next to hers. It wouldn't have mattered if there had been any regulations. There were plenty of regulations where she could have gotten rid of them, but the police wouldn't enforce it. But by persistence, she ended up not having to put up with it any longer. It went to court, and he has agreed to sell. But it had nothing to do with licensing. If he was going to do it, he'd get licensed and he'd still be a jerk. So this is ridiculous to even consider short-term rentals. The guy across the street from me built a $1.2 million house, decided he couldn't sell it, so he moved into it. He has a 2,400 square foot basement with a separate entrance, and I've seen people going in and out of there. Spend the night, couple of nights, and then leave. Parking is really ruined in our neighborhood because of it. And it's not going to make any difference. He thinks he's above the law. He will never get a license, and if he did, he would abuse it. But as far as needing place for medical staff, there was a property at Swedish Hospital that could have been used for this. It was proposed for a hotel. Thanks to ex-Mayor Penn and a few others, it got all this redevelopment credit was given to Rite Aid, which failed. They paid no taxes, few planning fees, few park and lieu fees, or anything, and it still failed. That is a perfect location for a hotel or a residence for medical staff.
Next, we have Christian Mills.
Hi, would you, do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that you would tell the truth in this matter before the Planning and Zoning Commission?
I do.
Would you please state your name?
Yes, my name is Christian Mills, 2952 South Ogden Street. Thanks for listening, and I'm really surprised. I was here for the session that we had last time, and I heard people talk about the studies that were happening in Europe, where more than 2 Airbnbs on a block destroyed the block, and there was interest in what this would do to communities, and now it really seems like Inglewood's pro STR, which is shocking to me. I live next, there's one 3 doors down from me, and the idea that it's going to be enforced is, I'm sorry, but it's laughable. The weeds are knee-high. We've called code enforcement. There are mattresses in the alley because they just throw them in the back alley when they're done. You can look in the front window and see mattresses leaning against the wall. It's the definition of a flop house. And I was surprised because the houses on my block are, they're not mansions or anything, but they're all worth about $500,000 because of where they're at. You don't have to do the math when you're getting $40-45 a mattress to see that if you don't have half occupancy, they're cash flowing about $5,000. Nobody's touching that. $40, you can get that on the corner. We just cleared out the plat today, and that was a public nuisance and public safety. Now, where's the public safety in this? Who's responsible for a bad actor that comes in and hurt somebody on that block? We've had multiple instances where people are knocking on doors, hammered. I mean, hammered. They don't know their name. Cops want to take them to the hospital, right? They go in there. We've had a Narcan response already. 3 or 4 cop cars and ambulances. I'm assuming the person's okay. What happened? The owner transferred it into an LLC. When somebody dies or they hit somebody, there are kids on that block. Who's responsible for that? Eric, who's responsible for that? Who would be responsible? Somebody kills, and it's a person who paid $35 for a mattress. Who's responsible for that? Do we want that? I know I don't, and I see it, and it's terrible. Needles in the weeds. I mean, I could go on. beyond not regulated. There is nobody there to take care of anything. So the idea that we can regulate it and enforce it is, I'm sorry, I don't see it. I don't have the faith. I've lived there for 19 years, and I haven't seen the ability for response. And I don't think it's malintent. I think it's just impossible to respond to all those things. I don't think the Inglewood PD can potentially respond to everything that they've got to do. So, that's it. Do you do a police record search on these houses to see how many times they get called? Those are questions. This is not just about our home values. It's about public safety, because something like this is going to happen. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Next, we have Joanna Marble.
I'm sorry, I signed up in error. I thought it was just a
Okay.
sign-up sheet.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Michelle Thompson as well. I didn't realize I was signing up to speak.
Okay, thank you. So then, do we have folks who have not signed up that would like to speak?
Do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that you will tell the truth in this proceeding before the Planning and Zoning Commission?
I do.
Please state your name and your address of the district you live in.
Tammy Williamson, 4198 South Washington. This whole thing is just blowing smoke up our asses. It's horrible. Why do we want to do this in R1C? This is my zone. I used to have a quiet neighborhood. My neighbors used to get along. We had, 2 years ago, an Airbnb moved in. Now it's hostile. The whole neighborhood is hostile, neighbor against neighbor. The guy who owns the place got to my son, and he's tearing my family apart with his party house. His property managers have threatened me. They have stood outside my house. I have video of them and their group of friends standing outside my door at 8 o'clock in the morning saying, let's get this message sent. I don't want STRs in my neighborhood. I don't want them in my zone. I don't want them anywhere around me. I had to go to the hospital because I've had so many cars hit and run. I am now permanently on anti-anxiety medication. I'm having an anxiety attack right now just talking about it. This is awful. It's grotesque. It's abuse. And what? We're just gonna get run over. I'm a longtime resident. But, some guy from out of state can buy a house, turn it into a profit, and nothing happens. People are parking on my lawn. Nothing happens. Cops say they can't do anything. People are driving on my lawn. I have a permanent dirt track on my front lawn from people driving on my lawn. I have had my fence broken twice. I've had to pick up other people's cigarette butts out of my backyard. My dogs are out there. What if one hits them in the eye? How is this a good idea at all? Really, it's just awful. This is tearing me apart. I am going to have a stroke, and soon, if my blood pressure does not go down, I can't relax, because I can't. You know what I have to do? I have to look up my neighbor's calendar, his rental calendar, to find out what my days off are, the days that I can sleep in my bed. And during the winter, that's only 3 days a week. During the summer, no. And you know what? The last city council meeting I went to, and I was talking about, Airbnbs and how bad it was, and please shut it down, please get rid of it so I can sleep at night. And it was snowing that night, and how wonderful it was to come home to find somebody from an Airbnb parked in my spot, so I had to walk through the snow to get to my door. This parking thing, unenforceable. This guy, the house next to me has a huge driveway, and plus he has converted his top floor into the nursing thing.
Thank you, Tammy.
Into the traveling nursing thing. No nurse is gonna wanna park there. You work 48 hours, you want someone knocking on your door to move your car? It's a huge parking hassle.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Eric, is there anything, or just wanted to double check, any other public that want to speak? Okay. Is there one more? Okay.
Do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that you would tell the truth in this proceeding before the Planning and Zoning Commission?
I do.
Please state your name and
My name is Maureen White, and I live in the 3200 block of South Grant Street. I didn't plan on coming to speak tonight, but I'm going to kind of skip around. I want to address the idea that Swedish needs places for families to stay or contract help. We know all about the contract help because my husband has a townhouse out at Coal Mine and Sims. And the company that contracts places for the nurses to stay, used his townhouse. They were willing to go that far out. Inglewood doesn't have to be the only supplier of housing for those people. And at that open forum, I believe it was, I asked, why can't empty apartment units in Inglewood, and there are plenty of them, we live across the street from Apartment House, rent an apartment if they choose to, a furnished apartment for a month, 2 months, couple weeks, whatever. They get income. Families have a walking place, a place that's within walking distance of the hospital to go and see their family member who's in the hospital. Employees of the hospital could rent some of those empty apartments. And I was told, no, that's not allowed. Well, maybe you guys on planning and zoning can figure out why that isn't allowed, and why don't we take advantage of that resource that's out there. That night, too, it came to light that the city says they don't know where these places are. And I had to laugh because the gentleman who was talking about having an ADU and keeping it constantly rented is on the corner of Logan and Floyd. And yes, those were not built with that in mind. We were not sold, the neighbors there, that that's how they could be used. But he has the symbol, he did till that night, after that night, in his yard. It's an upside down heart. They put it on the gate, they put it in the alley, they put it so the renters can come and find the place that they're supposed to be staying in as an Airbnb. So how the city's missing that, I do not know. Let's see what else. So it was interesting today, I listened to the candidates for city managers' interviews, 3 of them, how often they came back to the comprehensive plan. And if you've been paying attention at all, even in a mayor-manager city meeting, where it was just the mayor pro tem, the mayor, and the city manager brought up the fact that that comprehensive plan needs to be studied and revised, updated. And that was mentioned at each one of those interviews. I don't think you all should move forward on this until that happens, at least until they start looking at the comprehensive plan. Because all of these things, the ADUs were never mentioned in all those meetings as being able to be used as STRs, never. But I always suspected that would be the plan, and now we know it. That's the plan. So ADUs, STRs, all these multi-units, they're all just more high density for Inglewood. And that is a major concern right now for the residents, the majority of residents. And I think that the plan is just to look into that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that you will tell the truth in this proceeding before the Board of Adjustment and Appeals?
I do.
Please no. Oh.
That is,
Bad habit for 20 years.
that as well.
Okay, Planning and Zoning Commission, would you please state your name if you're a resident of Inglewood?
Absolutely. My name is Daniel Powell. I am a resident of Inglewood, and admittedly, I just had to look up what district I'm in. It gives you some idea of my typical level of engagement. I'm a transplant, like so many others, but I live in District 2, and I just wanted to state that I came here to STRs in Inglewood, but I want to emphasize that having heard the testimony of some of my neighbors here in Inglewood, I don't know that that any other or many other potential STR owners would necessarily have the same sense of urgency, but it really actually gave me pause to hear their stories, and I have a lot of humility about, you know, my own intentions here in Inglewood, having heard some of the, you know, really troubling accounts of what it can be like being a neighbor adjacent to something like this. That being said, I mean, I couldn't personally, in good conscience, allow any sort of business venture on my own to impede on the quality of life on my neighbors like that. But it's my hope that somehow, some way, in a manner that is frankly not yet clear to me, that that the council and the you know, the zoning planning commission, that they can see their way through to something. I mean, just generally speaking, it's my suspicion that, you know, my generation is never going to waver in their enthusiasm for these sorts of things, right? So it's just going to become the demand and the enthusiasm for that. I'm kind of, I don't know, I'm kind of a nostalgic type, and I gripe a lot, and I talk about how, you know, because I caught the tail end in my childhood. I remember when people knew their neighbors pretty well, and I like to deride the internet and cell phones and how everyone, you know, doesn't seem to have very good connections at the neighborhood level anymore. And it's hard to imagine how something like this could necessarily help in that regard. But again, I just, speaking pragmatically, I don't know that the demand is going anywhere. It's my hope that somehow, given the just eventualities that I think are unavoidable, that you know, these sorts of things can somehow be mitigated. I've heard talk of code enforcement, you know, existing code and the enforcement of existing code, and you know, there's quite a bit I don't know about the resources of Inglewood and their ability to enforce existing code, be it with parking nuisance issues or, you know, all different forms of nuisance that can arise between neighbors. It sounds to me that perhaps if some of that were better enforced, even setting the STR issue aside, that might be a better world to live in. But it's my understanding and my awareness that there are presently even, you know, I've been holding off personally due to the ambiguity and the uncertainty as to how the regulatory climate here in Inglewood for STRs is going to unfold. So I've been holding back, but I know that's not necessarily true of others. There are others that are more aggressive or ambitious than I, and so people are moving forward. There are existing Airbnbs in the neighborhood that I was considering doing a short-term rental. I'm sorry, I'm posing more questions than answers here, frankly, but I can only wonder, you know, how we might best see our way forward, because I don't see it going away. And I'm also, lastly, I would just like to add that I've heard the sentiment, and I'd like to echo it. I'm something of a pragmatist, and I'm a bit, if not cynical, you might say jaded or realistic, would probably be the word I would use when I hear tell of proposed new regulations by a body or by a small, like a local government that doesn't necessarily have the bandwidth or the resources to enforce existing ones. So I heard some very good points raised, and I wonder myself, I don't think anybody here wants to create a situation in which they go down that road, but none of this can be enforced. So I think it's important to be realistic and pragmatic. But again, just for the benefit of those here tonight, just wanted to go on record as a somewhat old millennial. I'm on the older end of the spectrum, but I am all too well aware of I've obviously used short-term rentals all over the place. I'm well aware of the demand, which is increasing, but I'm not at all surprised or doubtful of any of the accounts that I've heard. I think it's fair to call them horror stories. But the notion that we can just go back in time, as much as I'm inclined to that, I don't know that we can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One last call. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Eric, anything additional you'd like to add or to respond to?
No, not this time.
And does anyone on the commission have additional questions for staff before we close the public hearing? No? Okay. All right, do we have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved. Second.
Ms. Fuller?
Yes.
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Marshall?
Yes.
Ms. Austin?
Yes.
Too many people are.
Yeah, too many people on the mics. Can only have one.
There we go. Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Freemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Kenton?
Yes.
And Mr. Townley? Or, excuse me, Chair Townley?
Yes.
It was a long night last night.
Okay, I'd like to open up the floor for discussion. Anyone want to start?
Well, I'll ask the simple question. What is the goal of what we're trying to do tonight?
It would be to put forward a motion, a recommendation to City Council on the draft ordinance that's been put together.
Okay, so moved. I said so moved. To put forward the staff report and supporting materials to City Council. Is that correct, Madam Chair?
It's the ordinance.
The ordinance, yes.
So recommend, so if I just want to make sure I'm getting the motion correct. Your motion is to recommend to City Council, your motion is to recommend City Council approve the short-term rental ordinance,
Correct.
correct? Okay, I just want to make sure I get it right.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Discussion.
So I've been going back and forth on this for the last 2 weeks, thinking about my responses to this. And the one part, I agree that we need regulation. I'm okay with short-term rentals being accessory uses to one's own personal dwelling, that you can rent out a space in your own home or rent your home for a week while you're on vacation. But the one part that I have a problem with is where we allow short-term rentals in ADUs, because I think that's the source of the problem. It would be fine if our regulations, and some of the apartments, it would be fine if the regulations said an person who lives in an ADU could rent their home as a short-term rental in the same way that a person who owns their home. But the way it's written, it allows the ADU to be maintained as a permanent short-term rental. And I believe that this negates the claim that it supports objectives live 1 and 1.2 and work 2.2, because in fact, the idea of having an ADU was to increase the number of rental properties available to long-term residents, and that was part of the rationale behind allowing ADUs. If you allow ADUs to be used solely as STRs, then they take properties out of the long-term rental, and they become the sources of the kinds of problems that we're hearing. And so I don't think that I can support this and if we can't fix that part. I'd also like to comment that the lessons learned from the Denver people who came to speak said that active enforcement of the regulations is key to the success. And they felt that allowing short-term rentals can be very good for a neighborhood, or it can be very bad, and the key to that is enforcement. And so I think it is incumbent upon City Council, if ultimately they pass this, that they mandate and fund active enforcement by a staff that is fully supported and dedicated to maintaining the order, to getting rid of nuisance properties, and eliminating the bad actors. Thanks.
I would accept a friendly amendment to limit the amount of time that ADUs could be used for a short-term rental, if you would like to propose that. I think that that's a valid point and would make the proposed language better. I'm very sympathetic to the people we heard from today, and all I can say is that part of the problems that you have all experienced are in some respects because we don't have any way to regulate these things at this point in time. They're going on anyway. So I think what our intent was as a commission was to work with staff to develop a set of rules and regulations, albeit we have to rely on code enforcement and others, community development and others, to make sure that STRs in the future are not the problems that you have presented today. I don't doubt for a minute of what you guys have presented today. But I'm a pragmatist, and these short-term rentals are happening. I can't turn a blind eye to that. And I think that this proposed language will help in the long run.
So do we have a friendly amendment? Or do you want to add an amendment to the motion?
Sure. I hadn't thought about that particular option, that ADUs could be limited in the number of times they're used as a short-term rental. So I'll throw it out there 4 times a year.
I actually wanted to add on too. I'm not sure when I mentioned this, but a few meetings ago, I expressed interest in, I don't know how easy this would be to regulate, but putting a cap on how often you are to rent out your home in a month, in a year, because then we could avoid people, because a primary residence is supposed to be defined as the place you live more than 50% of the year. So technically you shouldn't be renting out your apartment for more than 50%, or home for more than 50% of the year, but it would be tricky to regulate. But I would be open to adding that restriction to the whole thing. So it wouldn't just be ADUs, it would be primary as well, if anyone else is interested.
Madam Chair, I believe you have 2 issues on the table. The first is the initial friendly amendment. The second would be an additional amendment should we choose to move forward, just as a point of clarification. So you'd want a second to the first.
Yeah, do we have a second for Carolyn's amendment in terms of ADUs?
I'll second that.
I had further questions about it. When you said 4 times a year, did you mean 4 days out of the year? Or 4 for rentals, for,
I would like to see a little more input from others on this, because that's just off the top of my head. My goal in this is to allow people who have an ADU to occasionally rent it if they have the option, but not keep an ADU that is only maintained as a short-term rental, because I think that becomes a source of the kind of problems we can see.
And on that point, I was initially, I agreed with you that I thought having ADUs as an STR would be really problematic because of the separation between the primary residence of the owner and the ADU. And to me, what changed my mind on that point was the feedback that we received from Denver. And they took the position that their experience has been that the short-term rentals, that if you're doing it in an ADU, that's one of the best scenarios that you can have because the owner's actually on the property. And I was surprised by their position on that point because I was expecting exactly the opposite.
I was just going to propose a number for ADU limits, maybe 3 days per month, because then that would account for maybe one person's stay in your home once per month.
My problem with any of that is there's no way to enforce it. We discussed at length in many of these meetings about having to pay a company that would have to monitor how often this was advertised, who had one, etc. There is no way to know how many times that is rented out. There was no way, even with a paid monitor, for us to determine that number. So it's going to be right back to where we are, which is signing an affidavit and then fielding complaints, which is where we are already. So I don't know that adding an additional requirement gets us anywhere different than where we are today, because all we have is a signed affidavit saying that they're going to follow the rules and then enforcement by complaint. So I don't know what we get by adding another rule. So that's mine.
I think one of the things, I hear what you're saying in terms of wanting to have a limitation on the ADUs, and the reasoning why ADUs were one of the reasons why they were initially put forward. But I think we're also considering a different case in a different situation right now, and ADUs are allowed. However, people want to use them, essentially. I don't see why we would put a restriction on ADUs and not put a restriction on all of them then. And I think we did have discussions at length that we didn't want to put a day limit or anything like that in terms of how many times things could be rented. So I think it would be hard for me to single out ADUs, that it would need to be all uses or none. And I also think because we haven't allowed multifamily units to be part of this ordinance, that we're not taking those out of the rental market in terms of, not having as many rentals, apartments and things like that. So that's my thought on it.
The other point to me that I thought was helpful, one way that we addressed it was saying that if you have an ADU, you can't use both your home and the ADU as a short-term rental. So that restricts the use of part of the property. You have the homeowner on the property living in one of the structures. So that makes it so that somebody living on that the owner is going to be there most of the time. That to me helps address some of the concerns that I heard about how houses are being used. That one of the restriction, the testimony we heard tonight highlighted to me why it's so important that we have resident ownership, because it sounds like some of the problems that people are dealing with are the result of absentee landlords that aren't part of the community, that are renting out their houses full-time. They're making money here, but they're not living here. And that to me was one of the important changes that we made, that you can't do that anymore.
And I truly appreciate all the time that this commission has put into discussing this and going round and round. The caution that I feel after listening to the people from Denver and listening to the testimony tonight is that, as the people from Denver pointed out, with allowing STRs, we are inserting commercial ventures into a residential neighborhood. And by allowing an ADU to be maintained solely for the purposes of being a short-term rental, I think we've pushed that boundary too far. And it can go too far into destroying the kind of neighborhood we've got.
And just to be clear, did you say for your friendly amendment 4 times?
Okay, I'll say.
Because we'll have to vote on that.
I know, okay. I will say 4 occasions per year.
It might be easy just to say contracts.
That's just fine.
4 contracts per year, okay?
Did I understand your point correctly, that you were saying that one of our original purposes for allowing ADUs was to help the housing supply, and this would not help the housing supply because it would be used for short-term rather? Is that correct? So I would agree with that point. I would agree with that point. I mean, I think it does conflict with our original goal in allowing ADUs, and I have some issues with that. I mean, obviously, as was pointed out, having the owner on the property does alleviate a lot of problems, but I still have a lot of issues with, having that kind of a, I still have concerns with that for the reasons that were mentioned.
Okay, should we go ahead and do a vote on the friendly amendment?
Okay, you ready? Ms. Fuller,
No.
Ms. Brown,
No.
Ms. Marshall,
Yes.
Ms. Austin,
No.
Mr. Patinos.
No.
Go back to my first page. Mr. Freemeyer,
No.
Mr. Kenton,
Can I abstain, or do I have to vote?
unfortunately,
Okay. I will vote no because I don't think it's sufficient. Thank you.
Chair Townley,
No.
motion fails. So now we're back to the original motion, unless we have a motion from Ms. Fuller and seconded for her consideration.
No longer.
No longer, okay. So we're on the original motion.
And Carolyn, did you want to add a motion? You also mentioned something about the enforcement piece, or did you want to add that to the motion, the original motion?
I don't know what's possible for us to do, but it seems to me we really, really need a strong department that will investigate and act if we're going to bring short-term rentals on board. And so, but I don't know where that can be included in this.
I'll do my best to give a summary here. We have a code today that does not contemplate short-term rentals. Regardless of whether we like them or not is immaterial, they're happening. And so the question becomes, what if anything would be the role of the city in trying to regulate and/or alleviate and/or bring some order to where there today is no order? And so the notion comes down to, should we regulate property or should we not regulate property? And if we do regulate property, in what zone districts would we regulate that? And/or allow short-term rentals or not? and all the specifics thereof. And we have studied this ad nauseum. I believe 27 months. I think it's gone to the council informally once, formally once, gone to the public twice, and here we are again at a public hearing. So ultimately, while we don't necessarily envy the job we have to do of making a decision as volunteers for what we hope to be as for the betterment of the community, we do, by virtue of the fact we agreed when we volunteered and said, yes, pick me, we get to do such wonderful tasks. So I can appreciate the fact that I don't particularly like regulations in and of themselves. I don't particularly like the fact that if you drive past Walmart, it's 25 miles an hour and people do 40 miles an hour and the police don't enforce that. If enough people do that and enough people complain, the police actually have an ordinance to go to that says the speed limit is 25 miles an hour and we shall enforce it at that point. If there is no recognition that there is a speed limit of any kind, then reasonable and proper would rule the day, and reasonable and proper for me may be different for somebody else. And so therefore we have the notion that we must regulate in some fashion that would be reasonable and prudent. So the notion that we don't recognize that which is a reality in our community, I think is failing the community. I think if the council fails to act, it's failing the community. I think we've had a huge amount of input into this and going around, literally, and not to be redundant, but ad nauseum about all the tweaks and variances and ifs, ands, and wherefores, and have contemplated that in detail and had multiple staff members to also give us direction in terms of, yeah, but, and what about this? And so the question ultimately comes down to, I think, a larger issue of code enforcement. That is not our decision. Code enforcement is the decision of the city council to do that which they've empowered the police chief to do, and it's up to the mayor and council to enforce that which they have voted in, and we have elected them, whether we voted them or not, they are our elected officials. It's their choice whether they choose to force enforcement of our laws. And arguably, and in multiple areas, I can see where they do a horrific job of that. And I think it needs to improve. That said, that still doesn't address this, and this is our best shot at short-term rentals and trying to not over-regulate and under-regulate, but protect the citizens, because part of regulation is not just at the people who would have a short-term rental, it's also to help the people that would be next to and or affected by a short-term rental and give the city the ability by code to be able to do something different than what they can do today. And I think this allows them to do it. Is it perfect? No. Will it be modified in the future? Yes. We would like to think we will know something different 5 years from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now than what we do today. Right now, what we know is we have a problem, and this is, in my opinion, after 27 months, the best shot at we have to regulate and to enforce and to help residents as opposed to harm them. So I will be voting yes.
Okay, do we have any other motions on the table, or can we go with the original motion? Okay, are we ready to call the vote?
Are you calling the question, Chair? Thank you. Ms. Fuller,
Yes.
Ms. Brown,
For all of the reasons that Mr. Freemeyer so eloquently stated, I vote yes.
Ms. Marshall,
Because of my concern over allowing ADUs to be used as permanent short-term rentals, I vote no.
Ms. Austin,
Yes.
Mr. Patinos,
Yes. There were a couple of other things that I just wanted to emphasize that I think are important things that we included that address some of the concerns that we heard tonight that haven't been brought up yet. One of those is the insurance requirement that if there is harm to the house or neighboring owners, that was something that we went back and forth on, and I think the testimony that we heard tonight makes it more clear that having the insurance requirement is something that's good both for the homeowners and for the neighborhood. Another point that we heard tonight that I was just the cost of homeownership in Inglewood is increasing dramatically as it is throughout the metro area. That's one of the benefits of the program, that by addressing the cost of home ownership, but having a requirement that prohibits non-resident owners from renting short-term rentals and requires the homeowners to be on the property. We're providing a pathway, especially for younger people, to be able to move into Inglewood and actually purchase a home. And then the third point is that unlike a lot of the code sections that we add, there's a revenue stream that's tied because of the taxes that will be generated that we're not currently capturing. This code section provides a mechanism to be able to provide the enforcement mechanisms that I think that was the clearest point that we heard from every single person that gave testimony tonight, that it's not acceptable for the city to pass this type of regulation and then not enforce it. And because of the revenue stream that's being generated, the city council and the appropriate authorities should be enforcing it.
Thank you. Mr. Freemeyer?
Yes.
Mr. Kinton?
For the reasons expressed, even with the concerns about ADUs being used, the status quo is not okay, and as we've discussed much, this is hopefully a way to improve it with the compliance and enforcement mechanisms that we can only recommend to be implemented. But yeah, I vote yes.
And Chair Townley?
I vote yes. We know that short-term rentals are happening in Inglewood, and we need an avenue to be able to regulate and permit them. We do appreciate everyone who's come forward tonight, and I think we definitely hear what people are saying, and we're hoping that what we've put forward will also help address what those concerns are. I think we need to be nimble in the sense to be able to, address changing technologies and changing things that are happening, and we have to be able to come up with regulations to address the changes that are happening in our city. I think the fact that we put in the owner-occupied requirement definitely makes it more restrictive than in some other communities, and our owner-occupied are existing citizens of Inglewood. I would also say that we currently have no hotels and very limited lodging in our community, and this is an opportunity for my friends and family who just stayed in Centennial all weekend to actually be able to stay within 4 miles of my home. So I would appreciate having more opportunities for lodging within our community. I also think that the draft ordinance meets many goals of the comp plan that was put forward in the staff report in terms of having more balanced mix of housing, having opportunity for workforce housing, and also opportunities to encourage diversity in terms of business types and being able to create avenues or revenues for our citizens in the community as well. I do want to recommend that the City Council really look into ways to bolster enforcement, possibly looking at a third party to help community development staff with enforcement, and also to bolster code enforcement as well. So I vote yes.
Motion passes.
Does anyone need a break before we move into the next public hearing? Good? Okay. So next on the agenda is public hearing case VAR 2019-007, 4550 South Broadway.
I'd move we open the public hearing.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Ms. Fuller?
Yes.
Ms. Ryder?
Yes.
Ms. Morsel?
Yes.
Ms. Austin?
Yes.
Mr. Patino?
Yes.
Mr.
Aye.
Mr. Kenton,
Yes.
and Chair Townley.
Yes. So we'll hear from staff? Okay.
Do you affirm or swear under the penalty of perjury that you will tell the truth in this proceeding before the Planning and Zoning Commission?
I do.
Please state your name.
Wade Burkholder. Good evening, Chair Townley, members of the Planning Commission. Tonight, we have before you an appeal to a staff decision on a limited use permit at 4550 South Broadway. As with most of the other appeals in the city of Englewood, they usually go and are processed through the Board of Adjustment and Appeals. However, the code for limited uses states that the commission shall hear appeals for limited use matters. So having said that, in March of 2019, the applicant, which is the Hertz Corporation, filed a limited use permit to establish a car rental facility for Lyft and Uber ride hailing drivers on approximately 15,500 square feet of real property, improved with an approximately 5,000 square foot building, again located at 4550 South Broadway. The zone is MUB2, and if you look at the use table, the table for allowed uses, automobile sales, automobile rental, automobile service and repair, detailing, surface parking areas, recreational vehicles and boats, sales or rental operations all require a limited use permit to be issued within this zone district prior to commencement of operations. Historically, since the 70s, this site was utilized as a used car sales lot. The most recent use was a dent and repair shop. Currently, the building and property is sitting vacant. I could not find prior limited use permits for any of these uses on the property. That's likely because of the long nature of the use that was there, and the code changes throughout the years didn't require limited use permits. However, with this use that we now consider a new use, which is essentially an automobile rental for Lyft and Uber drivers, we are and did require the limited use application be submitted. So along with the requirements and criteria for limited use, the code does state that restrictions are allowed to be imposed on a proposed limited use permit to ensure that potential adverse impacts on surrounding uses and properties will be substantially mitigated. In reviewing the application, we did find that the request met all the other criteria. And so on April 18th of 2019, the Community Development Department issued and approved a limited use permit to the Hertz Corporation. There were several conditions that you can see in your packet in Exhibit B. On May 7th of 2019, the owner of the property appealed the decision of placing the landscaping requirement on the approved limited use permit. And I'll read that condition to you in full. The condition is, considering the large amount of cars requested to be stored on site, a landscaping buffer is required to be provided between the lot and South Broadway. The Englewood Municipal Code states landscaping requirements for off-street parking areas includes a minimum landscape buffer of 6 feet between the lot and the abutting street, 1 2.5-inch caliber street tree per 30 lineal feet, and two of the following 3 criteria. At maturity, 30 inches minimum to 36-inch maximum height shrubs shall be placed at 3 feet on center. The minimum of 2 rows of perennials or ground cover at 18 is on center or sodded turf. And the third is a 30-foot minimum to inch, it's a typo there, inch maximum height masonry wall or decorative metal fence be installed. So this location already has the fence in place. So that already meets one of the 3 criteria, so there's only one other criteria that needed to be met amongst those 2 bulleted points. So in terms of why we placed the condition, the code states that landscaping for off-street parking is intended to improve the aesthetic appearance for parking lots and to protect and preserve the appearance, character, and value of surrounding property. So again, we did approve the limited use permit, but we did ask that the increase in landscaping occur per this code in order to provide and enhance the buffer in that area. The proposal is up to 50 vehicles be parked on this lot. And so, again, we just thought in the best planning practices that a buffer should be included along the street frontage of South Broadway. That being said, I'll entertain any questions that you might have. I will mention real quick that the Community Development Department does recommend that the Planning and Zoning Commission review the appeal materials and approve or deny the request this evening. Please note that a vote to approve the appeal overturns the decision of staff to require this buffer landscape requirement on South Broadway. A vote to deny the appeal would uphold the decision to place that condition on the application.
There's a third one.
Okay.
They can modify
Okay.
and remand back to the decision maker.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
I have a few questions. Some of this is covered, but I just wanted to clarify. So the conditional use permit or the need for a limited use permit is not unique to this property. It would be any property along South Broadway that's looking
To do this type of use.
to do that type of use.
That's correct.
Okay. And, let's see, sorry, I lost my other one, so I will go to Mark.
I have a couple. The landscaping criteria, those came out of the code, or were those, okay.
Yes. Yes.
Could you talk a little bit more about why you think that the mitigation was appropriate in this particular area around in the Duncan Park neighborhood?
I provided some pictures in the back of the staff report, and I'll mention that the pictures starting on page 48 start on the north half of Broadway, north of 285, and they work south. So you can see there are many businesses that employ both the fence and landscaping to buffer the parking lots along the corridor. I feel that once you get to the 4500 block of South Broadway, which starts on page 54 of the report and goes on to 55 and 56, there is a lack of any kind of green buffer. It's really a sea of concrete. And what my rationale in thinking of is that if, this condition could exist forever, a sea of concrete and whatnot, I think this is an opportunity to start retroactively greening the corridor when new uses come into operation or want to come into operation. That's the proper time to start implementing the landscaping regulations that have not been required for so many years. So I'm just looking at the overall aesthetic. The immediate property owner just to the south is the Circle K gas station. And you can see on page 55, the bottom picture, they have done a really nice landscaping buffer on their side lot line, which is immediately adjacent to this property. So you can start putting together a green corridor along this section of South Broadway where it's already been started in other areas of South Broadway, so I hope that answers your question.
I had two other questions. Whose obligation is it to maintain the landscaping?
It would be the property owners.
Okay, and then the next question is that the applicant had concerns about the width of the buffer zone. If you could explain the width of the buffer zone and the requirement of the first bullet point where you have 3 feet on center and how those are intended to work together, that would be helpful.
So the 6-foot minimum landscape width or area, the plantings can occur in that 6 feet of width, and it would be from the back of sidewalk into the property. So that's where the measurement would occur. It also would incorporate the area where the fence is located. So it would, the landscaping would go, either before or in front of or behind the current fence. We wouldn't dictate which side it's on, just that within that 6 feet, those plantings can be incorporated within that. And that comes right out of the code, the 6 feet. The first bullet point at maturity, 30-inch minimum to 36-inch maximum height shrubs at 3 feet on center. That's the spacing requirement. From the center of the shrub, you have to be 3 feet apart with that maximum width at maturity.
Along those lines, I think the applicant mentioned something about how the fence has a 30-inch concrete base. Can that be included? Because the fence is included in that 6 feet requirement, can that concrete base also be included?
In the green, I'm not sure I follow.
In the landscaping requirement, since the fence can be one of the 2 bullet points in
Yes.
the landscaping requirement, the concrete base that the fence is installed in, that can also be counted.
Yes.
So does that clear up the discussion in here about where the boundary is and how far back it goes? I can't imagine it in my head, what they're talking
Well,
about.
If you look at the picture on, well, I guess the best picture would be on the last page, 55 of 56, it says. You can see the sidewalk comes right up to the property line here. So the 6 feet would start in this area and go back. So that would include the fenced area and a little bit more.
And I just had one other point. So when I was looking at the code, it was 16-2-13 -C, point 2, point G, which gives, that's what you were acting under that authority, which what it says is that you can impose restrictions for screening and or buffering of the proposed use?
That's correct.
That's what you were operating under?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Any other questions for Wade at this time?
I have
Judy?
one. Is there any middle ground in terms of allowing non-permanent, like in shrubs in large pots that they could strategically place that are movable so that they can still get their cars in where they need them to? I don't know. I'm just trying to find a middle ground.
I applied the code,
Okay.
so I can't
Fair enough.
really say.
Fair enough.
Wait, how long has this not been a car lot?
I checked the business licenses. I believe it's about 2 years that it's not been a car lot.
Okay, and so in our code, isn't there a provision in there, clarified if you will, it's 180 days if it hasn't been used, at 180 days, and then
That's true.
this whole thing comes up?
Right. You
Whether
sort
we-
of lose any nonconformity or anything after that time frame. Yes.
Okay, and that rule has been in effect for at least 2 years that this has
Oh,
not
yeah,
been?
a lot longer, yeah, than that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other questions for Wade? Okay. Thank you. Now we have an opportunity for a presentation from the applicant.
Do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that you will tell the truth in this proceeding before the Planning and Zoning Commission?
I do.
Please state your name and address.
Jim Bonney, 6649 South Helena, Centennial. Commission members, staff, I assume that you've all seen my response to the city with regard to what they've imposed on the property. If you don't all have that, I'd like to take the time to read it. It more succinctly states my position here than trying to paraphrase it, so it may take 10 minutes to do, but if you'd allow me to do that, I'd appreciate it. First of all, I just want to say that I've had this property since 1977, and it's been operating operated as a used car lot ever since. For 35 years I had it, and then I leased it out to McDonald Automotive, who used it as a automotive sales and repair facility for pre-owned cars. After they left, I leased it out to a paintless dent repair operation that has had it up until October. Since that time, I've had it for lease. At that point, I had a contact with Hertz Rent-A-Car, who has a new pilot program with Uber to avail Uber drivers of cars, both Uber drivers who have attained a certain level of ridership that can get free cars, actually, or they're being paid for by the volume of passengers that they drive. So they're going to have new cars on the lot. Virtually 1 or 2 year old cars will be on the lot. These cars will be available for these people that hit these achievement marks, and also for people who are using their own car, who may have it in the shop for repairs, or for some other reason they just need a car so that they can continue to do their Uber business. So in this relationship with Hertz and Uber, that's the relationship that they're going to have, and the lot is going to hold no more cars than it's held for 40 years since I opened for business in March of 1978. The inference was by staff that this is going to be a visual impact that's overwhelming South Broadway. It's just simply not true. I think the city is trying to improve the looks of South Broadway at the cost of small business owners like myself and Hertz. By requiring this landscaping, we're going to potentially lose 3 to 5 parking places. These parking places are critical to a small business, and without those, it just cuts into the margin even more. I want to read, parts of my statement here. In 1977, I purchased the property. On the lot was an old frame house, a rundown cinder block building, and a large chicken coop. After removing those structures, I obtained financing for a used automobile sales and service facility. 5 years later, I added a 2,400 square foot showroom. And for the next 3+ decades, I operated Valley Motors there.
After completing the building, I installed a unique security fence along the Broadway sidewalk. I had a company design and build 8 decorative concrete planter boxes that were 2.5 feet wide and 7 feet long. Each one weighed about a half ton and was knee-high. In the summer, my staff mixed flowers in with the evergreen junipers. The planters served as a strong and attractive transition to the street. In August of 1985, the Englewood City Council passed an extremely contentious and oppressive ordinance that required all auto-related sales and service facilities to install a landscape buffer 10 feet wide for the length of their properties. Corner lots were required to landscape along both streets. Prior to the passage of the ordinance, numerous car dealers had spoken at council meetings describing the economic impact of having to permanently give away the most valuable square footage on their property. Most of these dealers own small lots, perhaps only 50 to 125 feet wide and 125 feet deep. Dealers saw this as an arbitrary governmental taking of our land. As a result, in 1986, 7 Englewood car dealers, including myself, brought a civil action against the city of Englewood, claiming the ordinance was unconstitutional. With the support of many other dealers, we ultimately prevailed in our lawsuit. In 1988, the presiding Arapahoe County Court District Judge ruled in our favor. Interestingly, the ruling never decided the constitutionality of the city's ordinance. The court found, as our attorney had also claimed in the suit, that the city had never formally adopted or defeated the original council bill that spawned the ordinance. Since it never was a properly adopted ordinance, the judge had no grounds to rule on its constitutionality. The case did demonstrate the tenacity of our business owners who felt they were being treated unfairly by the city. The prolonged legal action was, of course, expensive for both sides. A few years later, a kinder and gentler city of Englewood came up with a program to beautify the city in cooperation with property owners, particularly car dealers. The program was called the Englewood Fence. The idea was to have a unifying, architecturally designed metal fence any business could purchase. This was incentivized by a partial subsidy from the city. For automotive use properties, the city said the fence would be a way to have an attractive pedestrian edge on the walkways and keep displayed cars from nosing out onto the sidewalk. Even though I had my concrete planters that served the same purpose, I decided to go with the city Englewood fence. The fence was attractive. It would look nice in the winter when my flowers were gone, and it was quite expensive, however. But I wanted to support the city and be part of the new city look. Unfortunately, not a great number of properties installed the fence because of the expense and because the city's subsidy eventually ran out. My objections to these landscaping conditions that planning and zoning is putting on the property right now is that their permit conditions call for a minimum landscape buffer of 6 feet between the lot and the abutting street. This is a confusing statement. I assume this is meant to say the abutting public sidewalks, since the sidewalks are about 15 feet wide and are public property. If the city does mean abutting sidewalk, then the landscaping width would be measured from the survey pin at the sidewalk edge into my property. The Englewood fence sits on a special cement base, which is 30 inches wide on my property. I certainly don't want to have to remove the fence and base to do the landscaping. The fence nicely accomplishes the purpose the city and I had hoped. If community development's mandated landscape width of 72 inches from the edge of the sidewalk and the fence base is 30 inches onto my property, that leaves only 42 inches for landscaping. These confusing location requirements make it impossible for me or Hertz to know how to design, locate, and determine the cost of landscaping. Because of the encroachment of the landscaping buffer on the lot, between 2 and 3 parking spaces will be lost. That's not an insignificant number when the plan calls for a capacity of 28 cars in the parking areas B and C. Well, those are on a parking plan that I helped Hertz submit to the city. A lot of my lot is covered by building, shop, showroom, but the area that's in front of that calls for 28 plans and the 28 cars on the lot. But in every retail business, every square foot represents potential revenue. The city's statement that the 28 cars shown on the plan presents a significant impact to the Broadway corridor, that's a quote, is historically and aesthetically untrue. I operated Valley Motors for 34 years, with that number of cars often on display. The higher-end cars I sold required comfortable spacing for my customers. As many as 13 more cars can be parked inside, out of street view, that's in the showroom and the shop, and that further keeps the lot from looking crowded. I designed the Hertz parking plan to help them utilize the space effectively. It uses standard 9-foot wide spaces, with some being 10 feet or even wider. And that spacing provides plenty of room to walk around cars and to maintain a very orderly lot appearance. I must point out that my neighbor on the north has the same size lot, 125 feet by 125 feet, and is currently displaying 47 cars outside. The lot to the north of him currently has 23 cars on it, and it's just 50 feet wide by 125. Regarding a 6-foot wide landscape strip, I know the city must be aware of the difficulty of keeping plant material alive and healthy in the midst of asphalt, automobiles, and pedestrians. I applaud the city's efforts to installing landscape islands a few years ago. They are on South Broadway. They did not come down into the 4500 block. So maybe that's part of the intention, is to, because the city didn't put landscape islands there, they want businesses to put landscaping in. But it's hard to keep up. Despite even the best attempts by a municipality or business owner, small amounts of landscaping can die fairly easily and not get replaced quickly. I know the city's intentions are good. We all want Englewood to look as nice as possible. I'm proud of my property and have received compliments over the years from city council and staff. I've been told that the city wishes every car lot could look as nice. Those comments mean a lot to me. And it does bother me, though, that Englewood wants landscaping in my front yard while it neglects my backyard. That is the alley. It would cost everyone a little more in taxes, but the benefits would be so great. Unpaved alleys are just a dirty mess all the time. I'm sure other car dealers would be as alarmed as I am to know the city is asking for landscaping from a landlord and tenant with no change of use. This has been a car lot since day one. It has not been vacant for the 2 years that staff is suggesting. It's always been a car lot, and it will continue to be with Hertz there. I've been negotiating this for 7 months. There's a lot of give and take on a deal like this, so it's very important to me that I get this tenant in there, and for them to be happy with how they can use the property. But I'd like to know if Englewood has required this of any other dealers. I'm sincerely not intending to threaten the city, and I certainly don't want to take my appeal to other levels. But I strongly feel this small but very costly requirement does not benefit the citizens of Englewood, the city, or Hertz. To my knowledge, Hertz has been a responsible business operator in the city for years. They're a large public company with high standards. If my lease with them is finalized, they will do upgrades to the building, including the newest ADA standards. All of this is good for the city. I feel the landscaping requirement imposes an unnecessary and inconsequential to landscaping. It's a burden on me and Hertz, and I urge the city to rescind this use permit condition. Thank you.
Do we have
questions?
Yeah, any questions?
Thank you.
I had a couple questions.
Oh, sure.
What change to the building footprint will Hertz make if they sign the lease with you?
None.
So what are the upgrades to why would they have cars inside? So I understand like why you would have a showroom with, when you're selling cars, but why would they want an interior showroom with Uber drivers?
Well, they're not selling cars. They just simply want a place to put them. So when I was using for display and sale, that was a different purpose. For them, they're just using it as a storage facility. And I would submit that they probably won't have 50 cars parked on the lot. Being a rental car company, they don't make money when the cars are sitting there. So most likely, there will be nowhere near as many as what Hertz has asked for. Hertz wants to be able to use all the space on the property, without it being crowded, with it being safe, so that their customers can get in and out. And so nothing is really changing other than just storage of cars versus sale of cars.
Can I call you Jim?
Please.
Jim, do you have any indication of how many cars, when this was a dent repair shop, how many cars were typically on the lot at that point? Any
Not a
idea?
lot. Again, their business is a quick turnover. Somebody has hail damage on their car. They get them in, they fix them, and they try and get them back within a week. So I'd say at any one time, there might have been 15 or 20 cars there.
And would you have, where would they typically park those cars? Do you recall?
The dent repair people?
Yes, sir.
Well, they try and put them on the front row, the nicer cars that they were repairing, just to show that they can fix those kinds of cars. But so the front row and a little bit behind, and then the rest of them were in the shop.
Okay, thank you.
I had just a couple of other questions. The statute, the part of the city code that the city acted under, it doesn't sound like you're claiming that that's unconstitutional. Is that correct?
What they're trying to impose?
Yes.
I don't know about the constitutionality of it. I just know that it's a limited use permit. It has been for many, many years. And the fact that the use is not changing, okay, we're renting cars, we're not selling them. The use is not changing. I don't think that in any way allows them to start imposing a landscaping requirement on car dealerships. That's what happened back in 1985.
Okay, and then it doesn't seem like you're saying either that they didn't have, there wasn't a code provision that gave them the authority to impose the restriction that they imposed. Is that right?
I don't know the law. I'm not an attorney. All I know is that for years, car dealers have had lots, they've leased lots out, and to my knowledge, a landscaping provision has not ever been imposed since 1985. I may be wrong, but I'm not aware of any where a landscaping provision has been imposed strictly by the change of a tenant of a building who is still using it for the same purpose.
Just so I can get this sort of clear in my mind, is that the sidewalk ends, and then 30 inches in from the sidewalk is where the fence is that correct?
Yeah, a heavy concrete base was poured to put this heavy metal base on it. So 30 inches in from the sidewalk edge is where the Englewood fence sits. So if the requirement is for 72 inches, then that leaves another 42 inches to try and cram landscaping in, which will prevent cars from parking there, but it'll give us a very narrow landscape area behind what's already a decorative fence. It just seems like a double whammy to me that I go along with the city, put the fence in, and now they're saying, that's not enough, you gotta put all this greenery in.
Right. So is there a potential for, in that 30 inches, to plant some trees or something that will be very close to the sidewalk, but on the exterior of the fence?
Any kind of a pot that would hold a tree of what is being asked for here would take away a parking space. Wherever that was, that would take away a parking space. Plus you have to maneuver around it with a car.
Well, I'm talking about the 30 inches from the sidewalk to the fence. You could plant a tree there, not in a pot.
No. The 30 inches of base that goes from the edge of the sidewalk into the lot. In the middle of that 30 inches is where the fence sits. So you can't park and you can't put trees in front of it. You can't put trees behind it where the cement is. You only have asphalt from there on. So you'd have to cut out 42 inches of asphalt to put some sort of greenery in, which is very hard to keep alive, and big trees, it's very difficult to do.
No, I understand. I actually manage a property for my family that's on Colorado Boulevard in Mississippi, so I understand how difficult it is to maintain landscaping in those kinds of areas. I was just trying to think if maybe there's some way to compromise, so that was my, one of
Okay,
the end
sure.
of my question.
Sure,
Thanks.
I just don't see a way to make it work.
Have you had an opportunity to talk with Hertz or the person who'd be, the company that would be leasing the property about the landscaping requirement or what they would be able to
Daily.
do for that?
Yes, it's a big imposition for them, and they're not happy at all about this. And they've had to post a $20,000 performance bond to put it in if this appeal fails. So I guess that's the estimated cost of installing some sort of landscaping.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Thank you.
Does staff have anything else, or does anyone have questions for staff? Wait.
I just want to add one part to the last comment about Hertz. Yes, we do have a bond for $20,000 and an agreement with them that if the condition stays as written, we have given them till October of this year to actually do the installation. So this particular situation is not holding Hertz up from opening and operating. So I just wanted to make that statement.
I had a couple additional questions for staff. So do we have any other kind of programs, something similar to the facade improvement or anything like that? Any grant opportunities for a business to apply for landscaping improvements?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Not at this time, okay. And then if there were other auto-oriented uses proposed for the site, they would still have to get a limited use permit.
Yes, because there has never been a limited use permit that I found. on
And
this
so whatever
application.
decision does the limited use permit it goes with the use or goes with the site for ever? Say Hertz leaves and someone else comes in, another limited use permit we'd have to apply for another one?
Well, as long as those conditions were still being met from the original, they wouldn't have to do a new one.
Okay.
Or if if an ownership changed, they wouldn't have to refile for a new permit.
Okay. Thank you. Do we have any other questions for Wade?
Just one point of clarification. So if Mr. Bonney did keep the property used for selling cars, would he have to add landscaping?
Well, the limited use would be a new application, which in my opinion triggers the requirements of the code to be met.
So any
So,
new
yes.
person that he leases to, this would be hit with him, he would be hit with this?
If they need a limited use permit, yes.
Okay.
So, and this is, in my mind, this is important. When did this conversation with the applicant begin with the city?
February, March of this year?
Okay, so that has been within 180 days, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And sort of to Judy's point earlier, in terms of any flexibility or anything like that within, you applied the code to this. Is there an opportunity for flexibility in terms of what they could put there that would grow if it is a smaller area? Or has staff been able to do that with other properties or?
Certainly. I mean, you see along the Chick-fil-A on the northern part of the city, when we did the PUD, those are considered, street landscaping conditions. Alta Cherry Hills has the trees along the street. So there are species, yes, that are more adaptable to those conditions that we can certainly provide that list of what's in these projects to the applicant, or to the applicant.
Who enforces that landscaping is maintained?
It would be community development in their review of the limited use permit each year.
Okay, because I remember a few weeks back, there was a mention that Chick-fil-A was letting their trees die, and so I didn't know if, like, who does address those types of things.
So that would be community development as part of a zoning violation.
Okay, cool,
yeah.
thank you.
Well, I also will state that there, in addition to the species of trees, trees can also be treated with a fertilizer and a growth inhibitor, so that they don't have to, when they're in hell spots like that, they have a greater chance of surviving. So just to sort of, just personal knowledge, that's a possibility, so.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, thank you.
I'd move the public hearing be closed.
We have to have opportunity, I think, for public testimony. Do we have any members of the public here? We had one person signed up, but that was Mr. Bond, to speak, but I didn't know if anyone else wanted to speak on this case. Okay, thank you.
Seeing no one wants to speak from the public, I'd move that we close the public hearing.
I second.
Ms. Fuller? Just to close the public hearing, which means no more public testimony.
Yes.
That's okay. Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Marshall?
Yes.
Ms. Austin?
Yes.
Mr. Patino?
Yes.
Mr. Freemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Kenton?
Yes. Yes.
And Chair Townley?
Yes. Okay, so do we have a motion?
Since we do move things in the affirmative, I would move that we, accept the, this is backwards. So we'll put this in the affirmative. I would move we accept this as presented by staff.
So what, then I'll move that we deny the appeal and uphold the limited use permit condition as imposed by staff.
I'll second that.
So Madam Chair, could you confirm one more time, a vote for this is to do what, and a vote against it is to do what?
Yes. A vote for this would be to deny the appeal.
So, a vote to approve the appeal would overturn the decision of staff. A vote to deny the appeal upholds the limited use permit condition as stated by staff.
So yes, overturn staff, no.
Correct.
That's if we redo the
The way that I
motion.
did the way that I did them, it may be easiest when we vote to say I vote to deny the appeal or grant the appeal, but a vote yes for the motion would be a vote to deny the appeal and uphold the city's decision. A vote no on the motion would overturn the city's decision.
I think we have a
Double
Dugan?
negative.
Yeah. City attorney.
Yeah. Vote no would be to reverse. A vote no would be to reverse staff's decision, I think, right? No.
You vote no.
You're either reversing or affirming staff's decision.
Is it easier to put the motion to uphold the decision of the planning manager? That way if you're voting yes, you're upholding
Can you repeat that, Nancy?
Motion to uphold the decision of the planning manager or community development or whatever you want to do.
Okay. Merck, would you want to?
But I think what we have to do is decide whether we're denying the appeal or affirming or granting the appeal.
So if we have a motion to approve the decision of the planning manager, that would be
That'd be
denying the
denying the appeal.
appeal.
So that's what I move, that we deny the appeal. And so if you vote yes on my motion, you're voting yes to uphold the city's decision.
Okay. Is that clear? I'm pointing to the people recording.
I've got it, I just want the commissioners to have it.
Okay, we got it, all right.
So does everyone know the yes, no?
Discussion?
I'll kick it off. It would seem to me that a couple things in my mind that play into this. Number one, this property has been a car lot since 1978. From a public standpoint, it has not changed, albeit who's leasing the building and who's operating out of the building has not changed in years, okay? With the exception of in October, the property became empty, and shortly thereafter, but certainly within 180 days, the applicant has entered negotiations with the city, if you will, and wants to continue, for all practical purposes, what the community has seen as being an ongoing car lot or car operation in some fashion, whereby cars were presumably parked closest to the street, and so that's what people would see going by. I think the city in previous conversations has had conversations, and so has this body previously, of when a car lot goes away and it's an empty use for at least 180 days, then the notion would be that that car lot, or the ability to have that lot as being a car lot in a traditional sense, has also expired. So on the 181st day, they're done, and they would be subject to whatever new zoning and or ordinances that would be in place at the time, rules at the time. I don't see where this property has necessarily changed its effective use over the years, and albeit while I'd like to see, and I believe the applicant is certainly somebody who's has a long track record, given the Englewood fence, of doing things that other people didn't do because he wanted to be a good community member, and I think that that commitment in and of itself, and the fact that it's still there and maintained, represents is a representation of the fact that this gentleman would like to continue as such and continue to have a decent lot. I do believe Hertz is a quality company, and I've rented from them numerous times and never had any issues, and their buildings are usually upheld. So while I do appreciate staff's exuberance to do that which this commission and the council has previously stated, I'm not necessarily in agreement that at this point in time I can vote to affirm staff's decision to put in this temporary permit condition. So I'll be voting no.
I thought for a while it was a different kind of a business other than does a paint and dent repair, does that qualify as a car lot?
No.
Thank you.
For me, some of the things that I was listening for are the code section that the city office was operating under. Was there some kind of basis that the code section as applied to this particular applicant was unconstitutional? I didn't really, there wasn't a lawyer here, so I don't want to impose that, but it's, there wasn't anything about the requirement itself that violates the Constitution that I heard. The second part was the city acting in a manner that was out of line with what the code requires or enables them to do. And the specific provision that they were acting under enables them to put in screening and buffers. So it wasn't, to me, they weren't doing anything that was outside of their authority or outside of the line of what the code gives them the power to do. One of the things that I was listening for that I didn't hear was that the lease would be contingent on this resolution, on the appeal being successful. There are some costs that are associated with it, but the costs that are being imposed are tied to a particular code section. So it wasn't as though the requirements came out of nowhere. They're tied to other parts of the code that are requirements that are imposed on other property owners. To me, one of the other things that was important in evaluating my position is the comprehensive plan policies for this area. And in Duncan Park, the primary policy that would relate to this appeal is DP1, where the policy is to integrate a variety of land uses, including neighborhood serving retail and mixed use along Broadway to activate the neighborhood edge. To me, that seemed what the city was requiring as a way to be able to activate the neighborhood edge, increase the greenscape, and make it an area that's nicer, and I thought consistent with the plan for this particular area. So my vote is, because of those reasons, my vote is to vote yes on the motion and deny the appeal.
So I just want to be clear, are we calling the vote now?
Those were just my thoughts.
Those are your comments, but those are great to be able to record into findings. But I just wanted to see if anyone else was going to put forward any other motions or contingencies or anything like that. Otherwise, I think we can move forward with calling the vote.
Ms. Fuller, how do you vote?
I vote no to support the appeal.
You confuse me, I apologize.
No, right,
No.
to disagree with Mr. Smith.
Okay, so no means you would be granting the appeal?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure. Ms. Brown?
I'm voting no. I spend a lot of time driving up and down that part of Broadway. I agree that more landscaping would be appropriate. However, I also think that in support of small businesses, keeping people here and having good business here, I think that there's enough of a leeway that I just feel like this is really important, that we don't add additional burden on new, innovative. I think this is a very innovative business opportunity. It's not a used car lot. It's something that I just feel is important for the area. So I'm going to vote no.
Okay. Ms. Marshall?
I vote yes. I feel that I agree with the decision of the planning manager, and that's it.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Austin?
This is a very difficult vote because I agree with the no vote that we should be supporting long-term Inglewood businesses. And this appeal in some ways is sort of splitting hairs with the code, although I don't see how we can deny that that is part of the code and this is an actual change of use under the code. So I'm going to have to vote to deny the appeal. Is that right?
Yes.
Voting yes.
Okay.
Mr. Freemeyer?
We're out of order.
I'm going to you. I can change it up. Are you awake?
Oh, I wasn't aware that you could change it up, but thank you so much for the clarification. I'll be looking forward to that in the future. I'll be on my toes at all times. For reasons I've previously stated, while I can appreciate the fact that what we're trying to do is to improve the looks of the Broadway corridor, I also don't think that effectively from a community perspective it's necessarily ever changed in its look, apart from the fact for the last few months being vacant. So I will vote no.
Mr. Martinez?
I vote yes to deny the appeal for the reasons I stated previously.
Mr. Kinton?
I also vote yes. I don't think that I think that staff made the decision according to the decisions that were made to enforce the code. And I don't think it's up to us to determine whether we think code is good or bad, but I believe that he voted, I believe that we should support how that was interpreted. Thank you.
Chair Townley?
This is a difficult one, I agree. Although I am going to vote yes to uphold the decision of the planning manager. Although there is a cost involved, I don't think it's an unreasonable burden on the property owner, and that there's still pretty much all of the economic viability of the land and of the property. I also think that it helps to fulfill the goals of the comp plan for the Duncan Park neighborhood, as well as for improving the environment, bicycle and pedestrian environment along Broadway. And also our objectives around living and encouraging urban design that reduces dependency on the automobile, or improving pedestrian environment as well. This is a code that would be, or in terms of it being a limited use permit, that it's something that would be imposed on other uses along the corridor that would be doing something similar. So I don't think it's an undue burden to just this one property owner, that it's something that other property owners would need to be doing as well when that time comes. So I vote yes.
The motion is, or the vote is 5-3 to deny the appeal.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move on. Thank you. Move on to staff's choice.
I do not have anything further.
Attorney's choice.
Nothing tonight.
Commissioner's choice. Kate.
Nothing tonight.
Nothing, thank you.
Nothing.
Judy.
Nah, I got
You're welcome to.
I am welcome to.
Yeah.
I am going to editorialize. One thing, I brought it up in the last meeting, we talked about short-term rentals. And I want to bring it up again because I think we conveniently gloss over it, because nobody ever reacts to it, is the problems that a lot of the people brought up today, I believe, regarding short-term rentals are actually against long-term rentals. And I still don't understand why we regulate short-term rentals, but we are not regulating long-term rentals. And if we require a permit to have a short-term rental, we should require a permit for someone to have a long-term rental. And then we could then have taxes and fees associated with that could, and yes, in some ways, it's because I think one of the major problems that Englewood faces is the lack of long-term owner-occupied properties. And if we start to make rental property owners step up to the plate and become engaged in this city instead of absentee landlords, I think the problems that most of those people were discussing today would be much more likely to go away. I don't think they're short-term rental issues. I believe they're long-term rental issues. So, there, that's my editorialize.
Mike's turn.
Thank you. I can appreciate the fact that council, in their wisdom, has the opportunity to act as they see fit. I also have concerns that what they see fit doing is not necessarily in the best interest of the community. Specifically, as it relates to what was turned down 2 weeks ago on the old Sports Authority Center. While I can appreciate the fact that there was discussion over parking spaces, and people along the street didn't like the notion that somebody might, in the future, park there versus in the parking ramp. The notion that a use is being downgraded into a less intensive use and that being bad for the community relative to the comprehensive plan, frankly, is absurd. It's a gross dereliction of duty, and I think every one of us here that spent so much time trying to go through that PUD and looking at all the different aspects, looked at every single aspect there was, and there was no material change in that. So that's number one. Number two, there's been the notion and some discussion about whether there should be a moratorium on building and or development until somebody could look at the entire code, which is really, in essence, code for taking one's rights as a property owner by the government and not allowing them to do, even if within the zoning, to develop because somebody says that presumably 3 or 4 members of the city council believe that they presumably have a greater wisdom than what the last 100 years of elected and appointed officials have had, along with countless staff members, and to be so arrogant as to think that is reasonable, proper, prudent, and something that should be somehow just let go. I wanted to take an extra 2 weeks just to look at this and to say, what am I missing? Maybe there's wisdom that I didn't see or didn't hear about. Let's take a look at this a couple times. And literally, there was no wisdom. I didn't miss anything. What it was a few people decided they want Englewood, Colorado, presumably to be 1950. And 1950 is long since passed. And that is a sad, sad day when we have elected officials that believe that they can turn back the hands of time, number one. Number two, that they have a greater wisdom in their little brains than what collectively, how many bodies have sat in the Planning and Zoning Commission, how many people have served the citizens of Englewood, how many people have been elected and have developed a code over the last 100 years, and that these 3 or 4 people believe they have wisdom greater than that collective wisdom combined. I just find that to be preposterous. I hope they listen to this, because frankly, it's disgusting. And as I've heard from a number of people, it is a gross waste of time to spend 2 years on something and then have them throw it out. To spend a year on something and then have them say, well, we need to have another public hearing because the public hearing you did wasn't sufficient, or we'll have another public meeting. And really what it comes down to is an inability to make a decision. And that's whom we serve. And I think we do this more out of concern for the citizens of this community than we do for the council as it sits today. And I think that needs to be read into the public record. And I'd happily tell the people on the city council, I believe I will at their next meeting, just in case they missed this. I'm done.
Thank you, Mike. Michelle?
That's a hard act to follow. No comments, thank you.
Ditto.
Thank you. I just wanted to check with staff and see if we had anything scheduled for the July 2nd meeting, or we can go ahead and confirm that that is canceled.
We do not have anything scheduled.
Okay, so we'll confirm that that meeting will be canceled due to the July 4th holiday. And Mike and Judy, thank you very much for your comments, and I think those were well said and good things for ourselves as well as council to consider. So.
We do have a meeting in 2 weeks, correct?
Yes. Yes, we have a June 18th meeting, but not July 2nd. Okay. And with that, we're adjourned. Thank you.